Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Protocolos de CoVid-19 en producciones cinematográficas. For the School of Sciences in Mass Communications of the University of Costa Rica is glad to introduce you to Laura Avila Taxan and Jesse Bontrigger. I hope I say that okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Laura Avila Taxan is a Costa Rican producer based in Los Angeles, Fulbright scholar, and MFA in film and TV producing from Chapman University. Her film About Us, 2016, was the Costa Rican contender for the Best Foreign Language Film for the 89th Academy Awards. Rosado Furia 2014 received 7 awards at the Costa Rica International Film Festival and Icaro Central America. Aquí y Ahora 2019 received the Work in Progress Award at the Viña del Mar International Film Festival, Women in Film Los Angeles Finishing Fund, and was part of the 2018 IFP Narrative Lab selection. Laura also has worked in the MUN 2, NBCY Telemundo, in the programming and development department, and has shot in different cities of the US, Costa Rica, Mexico, Colombia, and Peru for various TV shows. She also worked for 5 years as the director of print traffic in the Costa Rica International Film, was a TV host for 4 years, and university professor at UCR. She works now as freelance producer, line producer, production manager, location manager, and scout. Okay, now Jesse told us that since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, I've served as a COVID coordinator for feature films. As with all things COVID related, this role is still fresh and not strictly defined. The bulk of my work involves planning and tracking all testing for cast and crew, who are required to test multiple times a week, if not daily, and ensuring everyone is sticking to COVID safe practices throughout their time on the project. I handle logistics in accordance with decisions the health safety supervisor and the studio have made for keeping the cast and crew as safe as possible while they work in this new and ever changing environment. Now I'm going to provide some indication in Spanish. Bueno, buenas tardes, bienvenidos, bienvenidas a todos y a todas por acá. Quería también comentarles que Laura y Jesse acaban de terminar de grabar una película para Apple y por esa razón es que en este momento tienen como un tiempo para poder darnos esta charla, así que agradecemos mucho la disponibilidad y disposición para que nos den la charla. Les quiero también leer algunas breves indicaciones con respecto a la dinámica de esta actividad. Les recordamos que esta es una comunidad académica que se rige por los estatutos institucionales. Como comunidad respetamos y promovemos la libertad de expresión en los espacios académicos y rechazamos los discursos de odio, racismo, homofobia, discriminación, machismo o que contengan cualquier otra forma de agresión verbal o visual, así como los comentarios malintencionados, groseros y irrespetuosos. Por esto les solicitamos muy atentamente que mantengamos la cordialidad durante la actividad evitando este tipo de comportamientos. Les iba a decir también que tratemos de mantener, por favor, las cámaras y micrófonos apagados, pero estábamos comentando antes de empezar la actividad que si quieren hacer una pregunta, sería súper interesante si quieren encender las cámaras y hacer las preguntas. Ahora le voy a pasar la palabra a Laura, que va a hacer como una serie de preguntas a Jessie. Esta actividad está planeada para durar 1 hora y entonces podemos hacer este diálogo. Si alguien prefiere hacer alguna consulta mediante el chat, lo pueden hacer. Yo le hago llegar las preguntas a Laura y si quieren hacerla, como les dije, encendiendo la cámara, también lo podemos hacer. Y bueno, aquí estamos. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Marigen. Y hola a todos. Hello, everyone. Voy a switch to inglés para conversar con Jessie. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us. Like, I think this is gonna be very interesting because even like for us, like when the whole pandemic started, like even in like the industry, we're wondering what's going on. I kept hearing about some people that were getting trained to be in your position, and like people didn't really know. Well, we still don't know, right? Like,
Right.
and things are changing every day. But it was for the first time in this movie, and looking like seeing you and like receiving your emails and your calls and seeing like you and how you organized your team to make us be like as safe as possible, that I could understand that a little better. But before that, I had no clue. So like that's why I think like this conversation between us can be very interesting to share with Costa Rica, like how we're trying to do things here. So why don't you tell us a little bit about like what is like this role, like the like for that you have in movies? How did you find out about it? How has the process been for you?
Yeah, good question. So my background is in production, so specifically working in the production office. So, your production coordinators, your supervisors, it would be kind of under that same umbrella that I've been a production assistant and a production secretary. So some different roles within the office, which is a lot of kind of traditionally is handling all of the logistics and all the paperwork and dealing with contracts and the studio and things like that. So my background wasn't and is not at all in like medical or anything like that. My background is just in production. So I really knew my way around kind of the logistics of everything. And then, yeah, when the pandemic hit, I was just finishing a TV show. And so I thought, kind of like everybody, I wasn't sure, like, am I going to work for a while? What's the industry going to look like? So pandemic started in like March, and then around June or July, I got a call from some producers who I had worked with, and they asked we're trying to start up a movie shooting during the pandemic. We don't really know like what it's going to look like, but we know we're going to need somebody who kind of handles the logistics specifically for COVID. um, so that's kind of how I got plugged in. And that first movie I did was it was finishing up a movie that had started before the pandemic hit, so it was just a few weeks long. So it's kind of a crash course. It was one of the first, if not the first, movies to come back in the pandemic. Um, so that movie, we really kind of figured out what the role was going to be. It started out as kind of one thing, and then as we got into it, we realized, oh, like there's all these other, COVID is constantly changing. Figuring out how to make a movie with hundreds of people during COVID it's always changing, kind of the logistics. So what the role kind of turned out to be, and then what it really was on this movie that you and I worked on, was a lot of testing. So you have for us, it was a crew on this movie of like 80 to 100 people, plus, the cast and any additionals that we had on some of those bigger days. So all those people are getting tested at different intervals. So for some people that are, more removed from the production, maybe they're not on set, they're getting tested less frequently, or maybe it's a different kind of test. But then for our like very vulnerable people like actors and the director, they're being tested really, really frequently. um, so the bulk of the job is making sure everybody's got their tests scheduled and getting them through the line, actually testing them, tracking all of that. You're For us on this movie, we were not in LA, so we were tracking everybody who's traveling in, and they have to test before they come, and then they show up, and then they test when they're on site. So it's mostly testing. It's a lot of testing. But then on top of that, you also have things like handling PPE, so all of the protective equipment. So people need masks and shields, and yeah, just answering questions that they have about that. Um, and yeah, each day is kind of a different beast in terms of how many actors you have and where the crew actually is shooting. And so there's different challenges each day. So kind of tackling the COVID stuff each day and figuring out how to handle it.
So Jesse, like how do you determine, like in a production, like the producers and you, and when you meet, like how is it determined, like how many tests? Like, can you explain a little bit of like the pods, and like why is it that actors and directors get tested more often? Because someone was telling me like, oh, is it because they're above the line, or like what is the and I'm like, no, it's not about that. So can you explain a little, why is it that some people would get tested every day and some people like me in this show like would be 2 times a week, right?
Mhm.
Or like some people only one, like on 1 week. Like how is it that you organized all of that?
Sure. So what we know about COVID obviously is that wearing a mask is super duper important, and keeping your distance is super important. All those kind of things that you keep hearing people talk about, keeping 6 feet of distance and always wearing your mask. Um, so when you look at a film crew, there are people that is just more difficult for them to do their job. So somebody like an actor, the movie that we're making, even though we're making it during COVID, it's not a movie about 2020. It doesn't take place in COVID times. So the actors that you actually see in the finished film aren't going to be wearing masks. They're not going to be keeping 6 feet of distance. We have actors kissing, we have them embracing each other. So those are, things that we can't really do in 2020 because of COVID risk. Um, so when we talk about some of those things are more like at-risk people, it's people that have to engage in practices like that. So we're testing people like our cast more frequently because they, as soon as the cameras are rolling, they're taking their masks off and they're interacting pretty intimately with each other. So that's the main piece is, you want to periodically make sure everybody working on the project is, testing negative for COVID, that they don't have it. But at the same time, when there are those people that are interacting more directly, you really have to make sure, okay, they've got this, they're kissing today, let's test them right before, boom, they're both negative. The chances of them getting COVID then before they shoot the versus, somebody like you or me, we're around, we're on set, but we're always wearing our masks and we're always keeping 6 feet of distance. There's nothing that you and I have to do that requires us to take those off or to get close with people. um, so someone like the director would also be included in that heavy frequency just because they're interacting with the cast and the cast are doing so much of that. So the pods is a way that we've kind of come up with to break down who is interacting with who. So a lot of times that happens in, as you kind of break down the different departments on a film set. Obviously, your electric crew is going to be interacting a lot with each other, and the actors are going to be interacting a lot with each other. So you kind of create these organic pods that basically say, I, as Jesse, have no reason to really interact with an electrician, within 6 feet, unmasked or anything like that. So we create a pod separation. The pods are just the names that we give different groups of people that are going to be closely interacting. And the main reason we do that is for contact tracing. So if anybody was to test positive for COVID, we can say, okay, well, every day they're interacting with these 5 people in their pod regularly. So we know to immediately isolate all of those people and test them, because their odds of getting COVID from someone who tests positive is a lot higher than me, who would not really interact with them on a daily basis.
So let's say, okay, so you're having like people in their different pods getting tested, like some 2, 3 times a week, some every day. Someone tests positive. Like, so what do you do? Like, what is it that the production does to make sure everyone else stays safe?
Sure. So it depends. Sometimes you'll have, for this movie that we just did, we were traveling people from LA, from San Francisco. There were I don't know, there were some locals, but not a lot. A lot of the crew was coming from other places. So we would test people before they traveled. And in that case, if somebody tests positive, well, a negative test is a condition of employment. So If they test positive, then that's it. They're just not coming.
I was
They're
so
not.
nervous when I was getting to. I was like, oh my god, what if like all of a sudden I got this movie, I got this job, and then like all
Right.
of a sudden it says, and
Then
I have
you
any
got COVID. It's a
symptoms.
no-go. Yeah. No, luckily, yeah, it didn't have to. You were all good. So, but yeah, so that was a condition of employment. So you kind of test people off right off the bat, make sure they're good. We
It was
have
for
all
2
of these.
weeks. 2 weeks
Uh,
before flying or driving there.
it was we required a quarantine period of, I believe it was a week before traveling, and so the tests happened within that time frame. Where we're saying you really kind of don't really go anywhere for the week before you travel. So if you're just at home, your likelihood of getting COVID is so low. And then we're also testing you. We're doing 2 tests. And if both of those come back negative, then we know, okay, well, at least they didn't have COVID when they traveled. So that's kind of the first big hurdle. And then once you're working on the project and you're actually, in the town working with the crew, the likelihood of getting COVID is pretty low. We were working in a very low risk area where there were a really low number of cases. And we had all of our protections in place, the masks, the distancing, our pod system to keep people separate. So you've really kind of created this bubble that makes it really hard for someone to get COVID, but they always could. Maybe they're picking up takeout in the evening for dinner, or you never know where you might pick it up. So if someone were to test positive, there was a whole kind of system in place, and that really fell more on, we have this position, the health safety supervisor was John. And John is kind of like my boss. He's like above me. And so he handles all of the kind of quarantining and stuff. But as I understand it, someone who would test positive, let's say it's the middle of the day and they're working, they immediately go into a quarantine. So they're sent to their hotel room. They don't interact with anybody. There's immediately a system of contact tracing in place. So interviewing the person to see who have you interacted with directly, X, and then figuring out any close contacts within a certain time frame from there, and then isolating those people as necessary until we can test them and make sure they're safe and clear as well.
Okay, so eventually that person, once they're safe and like time has passed, theoretically, could they come back to the movie, or that's it?
Yeah, there are some like protocols in place for that. I don't remember off the top of my head what they are, but I think, as long as they've quarantined for, it's probably like 2 weeks or so, and they, once they're coming back with negative tests, then I think, yeah, they can theoretically return to work on the project.
Do you think like now that like, because I know a bunch of people in LA that had like movies that were gonna go to production, but then they didn't because of the pandemic, and they were waiting, and they were like, oh yeah, like we're probably gonna start shooting in August, oh no, November, oh no 2021.
Mm.
And some people were like actually telling me like, we're actually waiting to see how your movie does, like how every, like, so do you feel like now more movies are gonna get greenlit to go to production? How do you feel like from the department that you're working on right now, like with dealing with all of these COVID testings and everything, like how are things going? Do you feel there's more production that's going to happen? Are the protocols that people are following similar? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we one big difference. So when I did my first movie, because I did one before the one that you and I did as a COVID guy, and when we did that one, there was COVID guy. Yeah, that's the official title. There was no precedent. Nobody had shot a movie in COVID before. So we got approval from all the different unions and guilds and everything. So it was really before there was kind of a unified protocol for this kind of thing. So we were really kind of like the guinea pigs in a way, and same with our movie too. It was still so early. But while we were working on this movie that you and I did, the unions and guilds came out with their kind of unified protocols for, here's across the board, if a studio is going to make a movie, a union project, here's all the different rules and restrictions that they need to follow. So I'd say, yeah, people have their eyes on our project to see how it goes, and to see what works. But at the same time, there's this big thing where all the unions and guilds have kind of come together and put their heads together and said, okay, here's all the protocols we can agree on. So I think that's another reason why you're going to have a lot more projects kind of springing up, just because there are kind of those safeguards in place and there is a uniformity to it. But who knows? Because also, like, LA just issued another stay-at-home order. So the COVID cases are going up right now. So I think there probably will also be a lot of productions that, even with those protocols, are still wanting to kind of hold on for a little bit longer and wait and see what happens.
I'm gonna make a parenthesis here because you were mentioning the unions, and in Costa Rica, like, there is no unions or such thing. So I'm gonna make a little parenthesis in Spanish to explain a little bit of that, Jesse. Esto, cuando él habla de las uniones, de los unions, son como, digamos que como colegios, como decir colegio de periodista, colegio, es como colegio / sindicato. O sea, entonces, como acá las cuestiones funcionan ya como una industria sólida, digamos, está el colegio, digamos, de donde están todos los directores de fotografía, está el Directors Guild of America, donde están los directores, ¿verdad? Está el de productores, están los Teamsters, que son todos los que manejan los camiones y todas estas cosas. Cada uno de ellos están organizados como colegio y como sindicato, digamos, para proteger a la gente de estos diferentes grupos. Entonces ellos también van a poner como sus reglas y protocolos para proteger a los suyos, ¿verdad? Entonces, en el momento que se hace una película, la gente de producción, en este caso Jesse, tienen que también seguir los protocolos que cada una de estas uniones o unions de las diferentes áreas, de los gremios adentro de una producción, tienen que seguir. Entonces, la verdad es que sí, hay como un engranaje ahí que hay que respetar, no es solo inventarlo. Por eso yo creo que es muy importante que nosotros, digamos, en Costa Rica lo veamos. O sea, nosotros no tenemos este engranaje ni esta estructura, pero al nosotros entender cómo lo están haciendo, podemos tratar de agarrar las buenas prácticas hasta donde podamos, ¿verdad? Hay muchas cosas que nosotros no podríamos hacer, como, bueno, o sea, con costos tenemos a veces el presupuesto para hacer las películas, como vamos a tener el presupuesto para tener un laboratorio en el set, ¿verdad? Y pagar este montón de tests. Like, Jesse, I'm telling them, like, it's like in Costa Rica, sometimes we barely, like, our movies, like, obviously they're non-union, they're super indie, we barely have the resources. So it's like, how are we gonna, like, possibly have a lab on set and, like, pay all these tests when we barely have the movie to shoot, right? Or to get it done. Like, we were barely making it happen. But that I think it's very important to understand, like, what bigger shows are trying to do to keep people safe, so that we try to at least try to get as close as we can to good practices, right? To try to keep the crew and the people we work with and that we love, like, safe. So what do you think are the most important practices? Let's say, like, it's a shoot, like, with almost no money. But let's say there is some, like, I don't know, like, what do you think is, like, the most important that you could try to, like, push in a production so that it's safe?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, all of the things that we know about how to be safe during COVID, like, just as people living our everyday lives, so wearing a mask and keeping our distance, and keeping the crew, I don't know what, like, Costa Rican crew sizes are like, but, like, keeping those crews as minimal as possible, which, is hard for big Hollywood productions. They're used to these crews of hundreds of people, and we're having to figure out how to kind of pare it down, and who really needs to be there, who can work remotely. We had, whole departments, like our whole accounting department was working remotely, which has its own challenges, but it makes it a lot easier in terms of,
for you, not for me.
Right. But yeah, I don't know, all of the things. I think that's a really big piece, is you have to have the trust of the crew. So, the crew wanted to, a lot of the people that were working on our movie had not done a project in COVID before. They, had been not working for a really long time, like several months. And So people really, really wanted to get back to work. And I think we're really enjoying kind of being back in a work atmosphere. And so people really pay attention to those protocols that you put in place because they want to work. They want to make it happen. They want to be there and work on the project. So I think, yeah, just being really clear about what the rules are for your crew. Everybody's got to wear a mask 100% of the time, or you can't work on the movie. Like, we will kick people off the set, if you're not following the protocols. And yeah, I mean, the biggest piece for us is testing, but I also say that knowing that it's a huge financial obligation. A huge chunk of the budget is to just testing everybody frequently. It's a luxury that not a lot of movies can afford, unfortunately, especially indie movies. It's going to be hard to kind of pick up and shoot during COVID for that very reason. It gets really expensive.
I have a question for you. So before working in this movie that we worked in together, I've been working in this production company that does music videos. So we were shooting like for the first, like, let's say March, April, May, all animation. Nobody was interacting, but then obviously all the music artists don't want, like, they want the people to see their faces, not just like the cartoon version of them, or even like not even them. So we started going into production, and what we were doing. So I want to use this example to see what you think, because now I'm like, oh, we were doing something to be able to go into production, but it wasn't that safe either. So what we were like and it's like maybe something closer to the productions that may be happening in Costa Rica right now, that are like 1, 2, or 3 day shoots, right? Not like 3 months shooting, like, or
Right.
6 weeks in production. It's just like half a week, 1 day to 3 days. So what we would tell people is that in order for them to be able to come to set, they had to have a negative COVID test that had happened, like where they had the result in the last 72 hours. But that was the minimum, and it was tough. It was hard to make people, like, especially I don't know, it was a lot of people didn't want, and there were a lot of people that were like, then we're not working in the movie. They didn't want to get tested. I'm still wondering why is it that people don't, like, we're gonna pay for the test, just go, like, send us the receipt, we'll reimburse. They wouldn't want to get tested. But then all we were asking was for a negative test that was where they had the results within the 72 hours before showing up on set. Do you think that maybe it should be that combined with some time of quarantine, or maybe because, like, for us, like in these music videos, we were like thinking of like budgeting for COVID testing. Obviously not like a lab on set and so many tests for so many people. It's like smaller crews that are like 30 to 40 people and just one test, right? But should we, in projects like that, maybe think like, okay, no, in order to really be safe, it should be at least 2? And should we demand some time of quarantine? But then at the same time, people won't want to do it because it's for a shorter show or shorter project. So what do you think? Maybe this is closer to Costa Rica.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would want to like call like an epidemiologist or like someone who really knows. But that being said, I know, I don't come from like the commercial world or the music video world. Like, the only projects I know are these kind of like long multi-month things. But I know I've heard of commercials, even shooting in LA, where they require the test before you come to work, but then it's just a day or two or a couple days, and so they don't test on set either. So I know that that's a thing that's happening. It's obviously, it's a little riskier because you have a high turnover. If you have people that are doing lots of those, they're going from set to set to set and potentially carrying something with them. But yeah, something like that with quarantine to me sounds safe. Like, if somebody's testing and then they're totally quarantined, then yeah, theoretically there's not a chance of them, picking it up if they test before they come to work and they've been quarantined. And then, in theory, they would be safe. But obviously there are some risks with that, which is where, the tests that we were doing on set were these rapid, they take 15 minutes to process. So, you know, people would show up at work and we would know right away before they even really got into work, you know, how, if they had COVID or not. So, yeah, so it totally depends. But I do know some smaller productions in LA are doing that. If it's just for like a day or whatever, you're right. It doesn't make sense to bring in a whole lab and do that kind of a thing.
Okay, so yeah, I was wondering because I kept hearing that it was rapid tests and we had the lab on set and I would see them physically in the little machines like with like test like with the tests and everything, but like I wouldn't get like information about like the results of my test until a day or a couple of days later. But you always knew. You guys always knew who was positive and negative, or were we all waiting for those 2 days?
No, not everybody was waiting for the 2 days. So we had, and this is kind of where the pod system comes into play. We're actually doing different types of tests. So for our people that are more like at-risk people who are being tested more frequently, they're getting these tests that are giving them basically immediate results. For someone like you who is, you know, a little bit more removed from the production, you're around it, but you're not, you know, you don't have to take your mask off. There's less risk, I guess I'd say. You're doing a different type of test, which actually gets sent off to a lab and processed within 24 hours. Um,
Uh,
so the only difference there is the lab test, when the lab processes it, it was a PCR test, which is just a little bit more of a reliable test. Um, so our like higher risk people, like our actors, were also doing those, but they would do one of those per week, and then the rest of their tests for the week were just the rapid ones. So it's a mixture of different kinds of tests. You know, if you're saying, well, the rapid one is slightly less reliable, but we're doing it, you know, every single day for some of these folks, then we can know, you know, even though it's a little less reliable, if we're getting negatives from it, then we're pretty much in the clear with them. Um,
okay, that makes sense. That
yeah.
makes sense. Jesse, let's play a game.
Oh,
Let's
fun.
and I know that like you're not like in like the health like area, like you're a production guy and you're coordinating and you understand and you're like kind of like helping it work out. So it's not like we're gonna hold you accountable for anything, but like
Okay, great.
let's say that I was producing something in Costa Rica, very limited budget, and I'm consulting with you and you're kind of like helping me set up in a way with like not a lot of money, but like safe as much as I can with very little. So let's say I'm shooting, I don't know, maybe it's a short or like something that I'm going to do in 2 weeks. Like, so it's 2 weeks of production. And I don't have a lot of money, but I want to be able to hire the people that I work with that are my friends. I want to make sure they're safe. Um, but it's a little more than a music video where we're going to be only shooting one day. So if I were to ask you, like, what do you think? Let's brainstorm. And again,
Uh-huh.
I know it's like, let's see this as an exercise. Like, what could be like a scenario, knowing that we're not telling any of you students and people to do it. It's just like brainstorming. Would it be like, maybe I would think that, okay, if I'm asking people for a music video for what, for 2 days to get like a COVID test and give me a result that is not older than 72 hours for one day, maybe if I'm shooting for 2 weeks, I budget to have people test once a week and then to quarantine 2 weeks before shooting and and ask them if they can please not go and see anyone outside of the production and just like quarantine, like work with the people like that are in the production or something to kind of like have a little bit more control. Like, do you think
Yeah,
something like that could work?
I would always lead with, and this is what we would tell people on the project that we did was, you know, if you're being intentionally unsafe or you're doing something that we've specifically told you not to do, you run the risk of giving everybody in this production COVID. Like, it's a very like serious thing. Like, because we're working, it's the nature of the job. We're working closely together in a confined space. So regardless of how much we have our masks on and whatever, we're still working together and we're not isolated. It's a group of people. So there's always a chance that if somebody decides to flaunt the rules and go to a club and without a mask and they get COVID, then they run the risk of infecting everybody in the production. So regardless of what the procedures are, I would be very clear about that, because that tends to get people thinking in a mindset kind of beyond themselves, that they feel like they've got their own responsibility to the production. And people, I think, are more willing to do that and to be in an isolated bubble if it is shorter. So if you're talking about a few days or even a couple weeks, I think telling people like, hey, to make this work, you really have to, like, I'm talking like, be at home or at work, and like those are your two spaces that you can be in. And I think people would hopefully be willing to do that. But that would probably be the biggest piece. In addition to the testing is great because it shows that, you don't have COVID presently, but the quarantining, the isolation, that's just as important to making sure they don't get COVID in the process. But yeah, I would
So
want to do, go ahead.
sorry. No, please finish.
I would want to do at least another test in there. Even our like most remotely working people on the movie we just did, like people who were in the production office, not even on set at all, they were being tested once a week. So I would say, more is always better. But you definitely want to keep up some kind of a regular testing if you're going to be there for longer than a day or two.
Let's say, let's keep playing. Let's say I already know my budget, and like it's 2 weeks and I only have money for 2 tests for everyone on the set. And it's gonna be a small crew. It's like, and we're gonna be, and I already know, like, let's say we're gonna shoot in these little surf town, like this, everything's gonna be shot in a house, like, because I've shot in, like, I have like a show, like I worked in a movie where we were all like in the same place, so it would be like an organic bubble, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So I already know that we're all gonna be there, kind of like staying in like the same area. There's nowhere you can go. We're gonna be kind of like quarantining together as a crew. And I have money for only 2 tests per person for 2 weeks. Then maybe then it would be better to use those tests before we get into the show, into the, like the production, to make sure that like we're super safe before getting into that bubble of production. What do you think?
I would say
You would tell me to get more money to test people more, probably.
no. In my non-professional opinion, I would say it's probably more important to have one of those tests as a checkpoint partway through, because otherwise, like, look at how long it takes for, like, COVID can incubate, and it can take a while for it to show. So maybe somebody picks it up the day before they test and start the show, they test negative, and then it turns out they've had it for most of the shoot and gave it to everybody, and we thought, well, they were negative at the beginning. It's better to have, I think, those checkpoints in place, to be regularly testing as much as you can.
Very interesting. So the minimum once a week, kind of like to be able to check how people are doing, and ideally a couple of times a week if you have money, people that are in like closer to the actors, if they are acting with no mask, and the people that are around them and like having to deal with them directly, ideally every day. But that's basically it.
Ideally, and really it comes down to making sure people know that we can't make movies how we used to. If someone doesn't have to be around the actors, then they shouldn't be around the actors. There should be a very clear separation. Yeah, a very clear separation between people, and it should really only be who it's 100% necessary to interact with.
What was your biggest challenge doing, like, for me, like I would always, like, I remember like sometimes I was so busy, I knew where the days where I had to go. I knew that I had to check on on my call sheet where you guys were gonna have the test and we were gonna be testing. But sometimes I would be super busy, and I was like, oh, today was Tuesday. Today like, and then I would like before even that happened, sometimes I would get a text from you, and I'm like, Jesse, like, so like you were always on top of like so many people, making sure everyone got tested, and then following up with the, like, what was the biggest challenge for you?
It was probably that. I like, if you would look at like my texts on my phone, is just like hundreds of unknown numbers that I'm just constantly texting. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a really good, like, one of my strong suits is like spreadsheets and like really like tracking like data and everything. So as soon as I would get like new crew members or background actors for Tuesday or whatever, they go into a spreadsheet that's just kind of like my master list of everybody who needs to test and when they need to test. And um but that's hard. It's hard to really keep track of. I mean, if you add in like background actors and everything towards the end, we're testing like 200 people a day. Like it gets insane. um so yeah, just remembering like each individual person and how often they're testing. There's different kinds of tests. So like on a Tuesday, they might be getting a fast, like a rapid test, or but then on Wednesday, they're getting this test that gets sent to the lab. It's so much tracking. And then um, letting there's actually like a medical team of like trained like nurses there who are administering the tests. So making sure they know what they're doing, so they've got the instructions of like, here's the test that this person's getting, making sure the person knows I need to be here at this time to get a test, and then facilitating all of that, making sure you don't tell 100 people to be there at the exact same time and create a line of 100 people down the street. So it's just a lot of planning and logistics. And then yeah, people forget, people get busy. I get it. It's like COVID is a new thing, and it's not always at the front of people's brains like it is in mine. So people will get busy and they'll forget that they have to come test. So it's a lot of kind of following up with people and making sure that they're on top of it. And then on top of all of that, it's kind of a like 24/7 job, because you're tracking these tests as they come in. You're trying to get the test taken as, so let's say somebody's traveling on Monday, you want to get their test as to make sure that they have the most recent result possible. But you also don't want it to be, you don't want the test result to come too late. So you're trying to time everything out. It's a constant like juggling of, well, we want them to take it as late as they can, but not too late. So the test results are coming in at all hours of the night, and people are saying, hey, I'm traveling at 8 a.m. Is my test in yet? Boom, it came in at 7 a.m. You're good to go. Like, yeah, so you're kind of like, that's my biggest thing, is just being on 24 hours a day and at my computer tracking results and things.
Yeah, I remember, Jesse, like, I remember first, like, I have to say, with witnesses, like, oh my God, Jesse, like, I remember before I drove to Humboldt, I was still in LA, and there were, like, I had missed calls, texts, I was very busy, and then there, like, my direct boss called me, and she was like, today is the last day where you can have this test. I need you to respond. And like all of you were like, because I needed to get like this test done before I could, like, so that there was enough time to allow me to drive to go to the shoots. I also remember one day, like, we were like coordinating with security guards, and like they were not gonna be like interacting with actors, not with a lot of the crew, but they were gonna be close enough to the set, so we needed some tests. And I remember I was like, Jesse, I know it's a day off, or I know it's very late, but I want to know. And you're like, oh, no. Like, I don't have days off. Like, no. I'm always, I'm still working.
I really
or
don't.
something like that. And I was like, yeah, he's not stopping. He's like
right.
always working.
Yeah, and there's workarounds for everything. I mean, obviously we try to be as safe as possible, but we also have protocols in place for like, oh, they want to bring in, a security guard who's not going to be, the most like, not going to really be interacting with the crew directly, but they're going to be around. So we can at least give them a test and get a rapid result. And, I'd say the biggest thing is we have these deadlines of like, okay, here's the date that they have to take a test to get the result in time. There's always ways to do a test later. It just costs a lot more money, because that's kind of, money's just the name of the game. So, there are ways to test a person, send it to a lab, and have it processed instantly. It just costs a lot of money. So we try to avoid that as much as possible. So that's another big piece of the job, is really pressuring people to get things done on time. Otherwise, we just have to spend more money, and that's no fun at all.
Sounds like a movie, right? It's like money, money, and if not more time and money, and
Yeah,
time
exactly.
costs money. Okay, so we're running out of time. It's crazy how fast this goes. So one last question from me before I open the mic. No, I'm kidding. I let other people ask questions. So other than the testing, what's the most important thing for you to try to be as safe as possible in a production? Like, let's say you already like have the testing, you know what you're gonna do. What are the recommendations that you would give us if we're gonna go to a production to be as safe as possible?
To be as safe as possible, I don't know how I would like rank them. I guess the testing is the biggest piece of my job. But one big thing that we had on the movie we just did was we had a set group of people who were just like our sanitizing crew. So they're going around constantly wiping down doorknobs, they're cleaning bathrooms, wiping everything down. They're fogging, which is, there's this fog that goes in and actually like coats surfaces and kills COVID. And so they're doing stuff like that. So having a designated crew like that is insanely helpful, because as careful as the crew is being, and as distanced as they're staying from one another, they're still using the same bathrooms and they're in the same building. And so having people going around wiping down all those surfaces is big. And then, yeah, just making sure that before the crew comes in and starts work, the producers, the studio, whoever is making the decisions, has created a very unified protocol for, here's everything that we're requiring of people, here's what you do in all these situations. Having a person like John, who was our health safety supervisor, who, as issues come up, he's an expert and can, well, we're going to do it this way. Or so yeah, it should be a pretty well-defined thing before people come in, so that as they're asking questions, as they're getting into it, they're going to have a lot of questions, because COVID is this brand new thing and we're all learning about it day by day. Just having people there to answer questions and to take care of all these little things.
Yeah, and the mask. Always wearing a mask.
And a mask. Very important. Wear a mask.
And keeping distance. But those are things that we should be doing in a production or outside of a production.
Yeah,
Always being wearing
totally.
a mask, keeping distance with people, washing our hands.
Yeah, when obviously like changing the pieces of production that just don't work the way they used to. And I don't know what like Costa Rican film production is like, but for us, like a big piece was changing how we did like meals on set. It's no longer a buffet line, it's got to be individually packaged stuff. So every department should also, it's not like it's my job to come up with COVID stuff and everybody else can just go about their business. No, it's every department is looking at the things that they're doing and say, well, how can we now do these in a COVID safe way?
Yes, no, that's great. Yeah, like to eat like that. Like crafty was handled different. Like to get a snack, you wouldn't just go to a table, like the crafty table, and grab things. Not even like to mention to grab a like carrot from a bowl and dip it. Like
Right.
everything was
Right.
packaged, and you would have to ask for it, and someone that was making sure it was like clean, like would give it to you. Well, wouldn't give it to you, would put it, and then you would grab it.
Yeah,
And then,
it really cut down the number of Skittles and bags of chips I would eat in a given day because I had to ask for all of them.
yeah. Yeah, I would have one donut instead of three.
Yeah, there's an added level of shame when you have to ask for it.
I would have to agree. Does anyone have a question? I'm sorry I didn't leave enough time. I was just asking and asking.
Hello, I have one. Uh,
Hola.
Hi, Laura. It's really nice to see you again. Hi, Jesse. Thank you for
Hello.
taking time to talk to us. I just have, well, I have a lot of questions, but I'm just gonna pick one. So I was wondering, and this is just, I guess, your personal opinion. I was wondering if you think that this will change the dynamics of producing a movie forever.
Great question.
Dun, 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 dun.
I do think yes. There's obviously some things that are just gonna change. They already have changed, and I think the very nature of something changing is when we get through COVID. When COVID becomes a thing of the past, hopefully sooner rather than later. Is it going to be to our benefit to change things again back to the old way, or keep it the way we've kind of adjusted? So I don't know. It's really interesting to think about. I think it'll probably be some hybrid. I don't know if we're ever going to go back to like the days of having a long buffet line of food where people are just grabbing in with their hands and stuff. Because even without COVID, it's just not super sanitary. So
A bun of bread and then putting it back. No, it's too hard.
exactly. And I don't even know, like, even just from a peace of mind standpoint, I don't know that I could ever look at a line of food that way again. It's weird. But there's obviously going to be some things, like it makes our job a lot harder to have this pod system in place where crew members can't really directly interact. That I think as soon as we can do away with it, I think we will. Because it just makes our job so much easier when people can talk face to face and not be isolated from one another. So I think the things that are safe and make our job easier, I think those will come back. But yeah, I do think there will definitely be like some lingering effects, just in terms of probably mostly just sanitizing and keeping kind of a healthy space. Because even before COVID, you had stuff like this where one person on the crew would get the flu and a bunch of people would get it. And it's because of some of these unhealthy practices that we had.
Okay, and another one really fast. In this moment, well, actually two, but one is quick. Did someone got fired because they didn't want to follow the protocols?
You cut out for a sec. Could you say that again?
Yes. Did someone got fired because they didn't want to follow protocols?
We were lucky. We had a crew that was really, really good at following instructions. I don't think we didn't have anybody who was like trying to kind of flaunt the protocols. Everybody kind of, I think, takes some reminding from time to time just because it's new and they're not used to this stuff. So, as people are working on this movie, it was like a 3-month process. And the very nature of people is, they'll be really careful at the beginning, but as they get to work and they're getting busy, they kind of forget. And maybe it's suddenly we're only 5 feet apart or 4 feet apart. So people take some reminding from time to time, and that's why we're there on set to remind people, hey, like 6 feet, or hey, can you like pull your mask up a little tighter, or
Your nose is
so
out of the mask.
what's that?
Because sometimes you see people and like the mask would be here and it's like,
yeah, exactly. Or there was one time even I got out of my car on set and I just totally forgot I didn't have it on. So it happens to all of us. But yeah, in general, people know what they're signing up for when you say, hey, we're making a movie, it's in COVID, here's all of these protocols that we're asking you to follow. And people are generally pretty respectful of those boundaries.
Okay,
also, like,
that's nice.
people had not been working for a while, and it's like you get the opportunity to work in a movie, and you have to follow these protocols, not just to stay working in the movie, but to be safe. So you kind of like want to do it.
Yeah,
Sometimes you forget, yes.
everybody's taking a risk by being there and working on set. So it's to everyone's benefit to be as safe as possible.
Okay, and my final question, I'm sorry for taking this much.
I love how Sophia turned on the camera to say like, hey, I will also have
I'm
a
sorry,
question.
hold on, just this one. We have like a big mental health concerns right now in the whole population. So I was wondering if you as producers took that into account and, mental health concerns. Did someone, I mean, this job is already very stressing. So I was wondering if you guys thought about that.
It wasn't a big concern for us, or at least as I was involved, we didn't do a whole lot with anything like that. I think the biggest piece that we would do that comes close to that is encouraging people. We have this long list of things you can't do to work in the production because it's not safe. But then also giving people a list of things that they can do. So saying, hey, if you want to, we're encouraging you to spend the weekend going on a hike, go on a socially distanced, run through the park, or, so giving them things that they can do outside of work that are safe and good for their mental health, but also aren't going to be detrimental to the production.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Do we have...
Hola.
María, ¿tenemos tiempo para una pregunta más?
Laura?
Okay, I was just checking.
You have time for one more question?
Yeah, I've got all the time in the world, so whatever you guys need. I'm just sitting here.
Great, thank you. Hi, thank you so much for sharing all this information with us. I'm super grateful for it. I was wondering, taking into account that Costa Rican filmmaking tends to be in the more indie side, and maybe you could like wait a little longer to do a production. Do you feel like this protocol would be safe enough to film with people who are high risk? For example, like I have a friend who's planning to make a documentary with people who are over 80. And like, I don't know how safe it would be to, like, even if you follow all of this protocol and you get tested and everything, if you believe it would be worth it to work with people who are at such high risk.
That's a really good question. I think in hindsight, it's always easier to say, well, we should have done this or we shouldn't have done this. So, you might do the project and nobody gets sick and you say, oh, well, thank goodness we did it. But there's always the opposite risk of you do it and get sick. It's very high risk, and that can be, the opposite. So what I would say is one thing that you do have going for you is if it's a documentary, you do have some advantages. I think there's ways to make a documentary during the pandemic where, it's being shot during the pandemic. There's the added layer of realism to it. You maybe don't have to have them take their masks off, or because, you're documenting life as it is in a pandemic. There are definitely significant risks to shooting with people who are high risk. And I would definitely be very, very cautious about doing anything with them where they're going to be around a lot of people or unmasked or anything like that. If there's any way to work around that, to shoot them through, I don't know, through glass, or to have them record themselves or keep the crew as minimal as possible, just send one person in with camera. But yeah, I would say unless it's if there's nothing time sensitive about the documentary, I would honestly wait. I would save it for a safer time, or do it in a way that's, doesn't compromise on the COVID safe practices.
Yeah, Sophie, I would say to brainstorm as much as possible. Who is this person? Where are they? What are the ways in which you can shoot it? Because I have worked in projects where it's like, okay, they can if we can like go when they're not there and set up everything, and then they just come and sit in front of the camera, and someone like not right in the same room can be asking the questions, and like you can create dynamics that are safer. Now it depends who the person is and what the location is and how what you need, but there are always ways around it. So like brainstorm, make lists of all the possibilities and find whichever is the safest way. um I would also say that yes, we sometimes think like of the people. Yes, we know for sure that people that are older are more at risk, but there's a lot of people that don't even know they're at risk and they're young. So like I think like brainstorming about what's the safest way to approach a situation should be like something you do either they're 80 or they're 25, you know, because you never know. Some people don't know that they're at risk too. Like, you know, it's so different. Everything is so different for every person. So always try to figure out the way that is safer.
And we're very much used to looking at screens this way, looking at this kind of Zoom call format. And I think if you've got a good documentary subject that people want to hear from and they have an interesting story, it's going to be just as interesting to hear about over a recorded Zoom call as it would be in an interview setup traditionally. So
Thank you very much.
mm-hmm.
We have another question from Fabiana Munoz. She's asking about things like makeup. How do they do that? How the actors do it? Then how do okay? She's asking about how
If
it
they
works mhm, with the actors with the makeup.
Yeah, so we have, for our project, we did away with any like hair and makeup and costuming for what we call our background actors. So aside from our main cast, anybody who was going to be in the background or just coming in for a day, those people would basically send pictures to costumes of their wardrobe and say, here's a couple different outfits I have that I think could work. And then costumes would say, great, bring that one, put on some basic makeup. So people were very much kind of like doing hair, makeup, and costuming themselves for those smaller parts, and then just kind of coming and stepping in front of the camera. So that was a big piece, so that, you know, our hair and makeup people aren't interacting with just dozens and dozens of people. And then for our main people, we had pretty strict protocols. They had, you know, their designated hair and makeup person who only interacted with a few people. Those people are wearing face shields and masks and everything as they're doing the makeup. So it's definitely, that's what makes them, that kind of contributes to their more at-risk status. Because our hair and makeup people are also interacting with them when they're breathing openly. Of people as much as possible, and then wherever we can, saying people do their own hair and makeup, they bring their own costumes. So yeah, it's definitely a unique and different thing. We were lucky with our movie that it was a pretty like natural look for everybody. We didn't have any crazy makeup or anything. It was pretty much just like teenagers living their life. So that helped. I don't know how it would work with some kind of crazy like hours long makeup process. Would be interesting.
All right. Well, I think we were close to the hour, only 5 minutes more, one extra question. This is so important, Jessie. Like, I'm so grateful that you gave us some of your time to share this, because like, as I was saying, even like for me, like being here and like actually like working during the pandemic, shooting like these shorter music videos, I kept hearing about your position. And I was always wondering how bigger movies were gonna do it when it was like more than 1 to 3 days shooting. So I thought your role was so interesting and so important. And I'm very glad you gave us some of your time to share it with Costa Rica.
Yeah, of course. And it's interesting to talk with, you know, I talked with a lot of crew members at the end of the project, and they're saying things like, you know, I feel safer on this film set than I did just living at home in the pandemic, because we
100%.
just had so many protocols in place, so much testing. So if you can create an atmosphere like that where people really feel safe, that's a huge plus.
I feel that I was trained in this movie, like Laura before the movie and then Laura after the movie. I came to the same apartment complex and I'm behaving different. I'm like doing
Changed
things so
person.
much. It's like, oh my god, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I have a little question. I was wondering, how does all these things change how I was wondering about the money. I mean, how much does it increases the price of the production?
Well,
I mean, as a like specific number, I don't really know. That's all kind of like handled by the studio and everything. I know that, an individual COVID test can be anywhere from 100 to 200 bucks at its like most basic, and then as you add in like, we want to get this processed in 24 hours or in 12 hours, you add, a few $100 onto that, or even like up to like 800, 900 bucks. So that's just the testing piece, and then you factor in all of your sanitizing equipment, any additional like personnel, so like our sanitizing personnel. It's a pretty big chunk of the budget. I guess I'll leave it kind of vague at that. I don't really know specifics, and I don't want to put any bad information out there, but yeah, it adds up, and it's a big consideration for anybody who's setting out to make a movie. Now with your smaller projects, it's probably less of a big chunk, but for a big multi-month movie, it takes time and money.
it's a full new department.
Yeah,
It's
it really is. It really
it's
is.
a new department. There's a lot of people that you would never see in a movie, and it's like I think in this one, like that you would constantly see on set that you wouldn't have them before COVID. It's like what, like 12 people, 15 people, like
Yeah.
that are at it, and like it's like I don't know, like I feel like just as like a camera and grip equipment has to be budgeted, plus the people working in that new department in this one is like the tests, like all the masks, all the like, even like we had to get additional like washing stations, to have
Right.
additional washing stations so that people in different sections could wash their hands. And like,
Yeah.
it's like, so it's like a lot of like to budget new equipment and new crew members to build a new department that is like because of COVID.
Yeah. It's crazy. I hope it doesn't have to be a thing for much longer. I'm like planning out my next couple projects and hoping like, okay, like probably don't have, fingers crossed, I don't have too many more projects as a COVID coordinator. Hopefully it becomes a thing of the past pretty quick.
Well, but I for me working in this movie, I was very glad you existed as a COVID coordinator, because you definitely made us all feel safer.
Well,
All right.
well, thank you very much for coming and talking with us. Um, for the University of Costa Rica, it's a great pleasure to have you both here. And well, I hope to see you soon in hopefully in other projects that doesn't involve COVID also. But
Yes.
thank you very much, and thank you for sharing all your work with us too.
Gracias, Jesse.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.